She walked into his wedding, head held high, diamond heels, red lips, and twin bodyguards flanking her. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The ex he tried to humiliate was unrecognizable. He thought he could break her, but what no one at that wedding knew was who she really had become. By the time he realized, she had already won. Have you ever wanted to prove someone wrong so badly that every late night, every setback, every scar became fuel? This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of becoming. Stick with me, because the woman he left, she didn't just come back stronger. She returned dangerous. Everyone has a moment when silence becomes a story, when pain becomes power. Here we don't just tell stories. We reveal the ones they tried to bury. For stories inspire stories of heartbreak, betrayal, a tale of romance. Hit the subscribe button. We tell the stories that stay with you. 7 years ago, no one would have noticed her in a crowd. Stella didn't come from wealth, didn't wear labels, didn't walk into rooms like she owned them. She was the kind of woman people overlooked, not because she lacked beauty or charm, but because she didn't announce herself. She was soft-spoken, kind-hearted, and completely in love. And unfortunately, the man she loved was the kind who needed a woman who sparkled loudly. Marco, on the other hand, was everything she wasn't. Born into a family that had never once worried about bills or broken cars or whether the rent would clear by the 5th. He wasn't just rich. He was polished. The kind of man whose shoes were always shined and whose watch cost more than her childhood home. He was charming, effortlessly so. People leaned in when he spoke. Stella, she leaned in too until he leaned away. When they met, it felt like a fairy tale no one believed would last. She was working part-time at a gallery cafe when he strolled in with his entourage, all of them in navy suits and expensive cologne. But Marco noticed her, or at least he said he did. He asked her name, learned she liked art, and said her laugh was the kind of sound you wanted to bottle and keep. Within weeks, they were dating. Within months, she was invited to dinner parties she had no idea how to dress for. She tried, though. God, she tried. She smiled at his colleagues, nodded along to wine talk she didn't understand, learned to walk in heels that left blisters. But no matter how much effort she put in, there was always this quiet hum in the background, the sound of not quite belonging. It wasn't that they said anything cruel. It was worse. They acted like she wasn't there, like she was a placeholder until someone better came along. And slowly, Marco started to treat her the same. The man who once brought her sketchbooks and left notes in her jacket pockets became someone who canceled dinners last minute and told her to try and look a little more polished before events. She could feel it, the distance, the shift. He still kissed her forehead, but he stopped holding her hand in public. Still called her babe, but with the casual indifferent tone you'd use for a houseplant. That should have been her first real warning. The tone, not the words. Those still came coated in fake affection. But the way they sounded when they hit her ears, hollow, rushed, like someone saying what they're supposed to say, not what they feel. But Stella had been trying to hold on to a fantasy for too long. And fantasy has a cruel way of fogging your view until you don't know the difference between affection and habit. So when Marco dropped to one knee beneath a blooming cherry blossom tree in Kyoto, yes, that kind of proposal, she told herself it was real. Her heart said yes before her brain could even process it. She cried. He smiled. Tourists clapped. Somewhere between his pocket square and the 2-carat ring, she believed he meant it. Despite the growing cracks in their relationship, this meant permanence, love, maybe even redemption. She never imagined she was being used as a transitional piece, something pretty to frame for a while before he found what truly matched his curated image. The engagement photos came next. She was in a simple cream dress, and he was in a navy suit that looked like it was tailored by angels. They posed for the cameras like royalty. She stood slightly behind him in every shot. At the time, she thought it was just the photographer's direction. Later, she realized it was a metaphor. 2 months later, she was at work halfway through a latte she couldn't afford when her phone exploded with notifications, texts from friends, mentions on Instagram. Her name was trending somehow. Her fingers shook as she opened the article. Golden CEO Marco Monroe confirmed split from fiancée Stella K. There was no call, no conversation, just a public statement crafted by his PR team. 4 sentences, maximum damage. We remain close friends. We wish each other the best. Our paths have grown in different directions. She reread the article 3 times, waiting for her brain to catch up to the betrayal. There were no messages from Marco, no explanation, just silence and a neatly packaged press release that erased her from his life. They had been in love, or at least she had been, and now she was nothing more than a bullet point in a media blurb. Her phone buzzed again. A picture. This time he was at a rooftop party, drink in hand, arm around a woman Stella recognized. A model, of course, the same one who had been just a friend when Stella asked about her 2 weeks ago. The comments were brutal, some sympathetic. Most weren't. Upgrade, one person wrote. Should have seen it coming, another said. She never belonged in his world. That one stung the most because deep down Stella had feared it all along. That she didn't belong. That no matter how hard she tried to keep up, to adapt, to blend in, she would always be just a visitor in his elite little universe. She had bent herself into 1,000 shapes trying to be enough. And now she was discarded like the wrong puzzle piece. So she did the only thing she could. She unplugged, deleted the apps, canceled everything, moved out of their apartment, his apartment, really, and into a shoebox studio that smelled like dust and desperation. She cut her hair, dyed it dark, stared at herself in the mirror, trying to find the version of her that existed before him. But she couldn't. That version was gone. In her place stood someone unfamiliar, someone raw and angry and deeply, deeply awake. She had loved blindly. And now her eyes were open. Marco had given her a crash course in cruelty wrapped in charm. And in losing everything, she was about to learn what it meant to build from nothing. She was about to become someone no one, especially Marco, would see coming. Would you believe that the next time she saw him, she'd be standing across from him in heels he once said she could never walk in, wearing a dress worth more than the car she used to drive, and carrying a secret that would bring the entire room to a hush? Yeah, but we're not there yet. Stay with me, because the revenge you're expecting isn't even the half of it. Let's talk about her. The girl after Stella. Because of course there was one, isn't there always? Barely 6 weeks after the press release detonated Stella's life, Marco was photographed again, this time on a beach in the Maldives. Clear skies, turquoise water, 2 wine glasses, and a woman with legs like runway lights and cheekbones sharp enough to cut through Stella's dignity. The model. The same one Stella had been warned about. The same one who used to show up at Marco's events coincidentally, laugh a little too loud at his jokes, and pretend not to notice Stella standing beside him. Now she was on his arm. In those photos, Marco looked free. Not sad, not apologetic, just lighter. Like someone who'd finally made the right decision. And for the tabloids, the story practically wrote itself. Billionaire bachelor leaves behind modest fiancé for glamorous model girlfriend. Power couple alert. Likes flooded in. Comments gushed. Stella watched it all in silence. She wasn't looking to hate watch, at least not at first. But sometimes pain makes you keep tabs on the very thing that broke you, like scratching a bruise to make sure it still hurts. And oh, it did. The worst part, the new girl was stunning. The kind of stunning that made people stop mid-scroll and go, "Damn!" She moved like she knew she was always being watched. And Stella had never learned to perform that way. She had always led with heart, not spectacle, with vulnerability, not angles. But Marco didn't want a heart. He wanted a show. The engagement came quickly. Publicly, of course. A rooftop proposal at sunset, drone footage, soft jazz playing in the background. Stella saw the video once. That was enough. He gave that woman the engagement Stella had dreamed about, the kind he claimed he wasn't the type to do. Funny how the right image changes everything. Now pause for a second. Imagine being Stella in this moment. Would you lash out? Would you post some cryptic quote about growth and betrayal? Maybe subtweet your pain until people started asking if you were okay. Stella did none of that. She disappeared. No more posts, no tagged photos. She even changed her number. It was like she dropped off the planet, and for most people, including Marco, she had. The world thought she was just another broken heart left behind in a billionaire's glitter trail. They assumed she'd crawl back to her old life, cry into wine glasses with her friends, maybe blog about heartbreak and healing. But Stella had something different in mind. She didn't disappear because she was destroyed. She disappeared because she was rebuilding. And you can't lay new foundations with everyone watching your rubble. She knew that if she stayed, she'd be defined by that relationship forever. The girl Marco dumped. The fiancée he left. And Stella, she was never going to be someone's cautionary tale. She packed what little she had, some clothes, a sketch pad, a few old books, and moved halfway across the world. She didn't tell anyone where, just left a single note for the one friend she trusted. The only line scribbled in ink. "I need to become someone else now. I'll find you when I'm ready." Let me ask you something. Have you ever lost so much that you no longer cared about what people thought of you? Because that's where real power begins. Not in applause, but in silence. Stella had no followers watching her journey. No sponsors, no pity comments from strangers. Just a hunger, a quiet rage, a steady fire that burned under her skin. She took jobs beneath her skill level, cleaned floors, waited tables, read business books on her break, watched online courses like her life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. She was building something no one could take from her. Not fame, not beauty, something real. In a tiny apartment with cracked tiles and no heating, she launched her first idea. A tiny startup, clumsy, imperfect, but hers. She stayed up till 3 a.m. most nights, trying to code, reading until her eyes blurred, writing business plans on napkins because she couldn't afford a printer. No one cheered her on, no one clapped, but she kept going. Because when the world writes your obituary too early, you have two choices: live down to it or come back from the dead. And Stella, she was preparing for resurrection. Now, if you're still with me, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside, you'll want to hear what happens next, because the girl they forgot, she's about to become the woman they'll never be able to ignore. It was 5 years to the month since the press release. Stella had just wrapped up a pitch meeting when it arrived. Simple, elegant, arrogant. A white envelope with gold trim and her full name embossed like royalty. There was no sender written on the outside, but the weight of it in her hands told her exactly who it was, from before she even broke the seal. She opened it slowly, like she already knew it was a trap wrapped in formal stationery. And there it was, a wedding invitation. Marco Monroe and Selena Devonshire cordially invite you to celebrate the beginning of their forever. Stella stared at the words, like they were a joke, like if she blinked long enough, the ink would smudge and reveal the punchline, but instead, beneath the faux poetic fluff and destination details, was a single handwritten note in pen that made her stomach twist. Please attend. It would mean the world to me. M. The audacity. The sheer, blinding, marble-carved audacity. After everything, after ghosting her with a press release, after proposing to another woman in public, after erasing her like she never mattered, he wanted her to witness him marry someone else. Why? For closure? For sport? Or maybe, just maybe, because he assumed she was still that quiet, easily dismissed girl who once stood in his shadow, grateful just to be included in the room. But here's the thing. That girl was gone. Long gone. In her place stood a woman who owned her name now, who had built something from the ashes of that heartbreak. Her startup thriving, her identity solid, her confidence no longer borrowed from the man next to her, but stitched from every hard night and lonely triumph she had fought through in silence. Stella didn't cry. She didn't curse. She didn't even feel bitter. What she felt, strangely enough, was clarity and something sharper beneath it. Opportunity. She read the invite again, slower this time. Destination wedding, coastal estate in Italy, private vineyard, dress code, formal. She smirked. Of course, it was a vineyard. Marco always did like to repeat his greatest hits. For a brief moment, Stella considered declining, but then she thought of something else, something deeper than revenge or nostalgia. She thought about reclaiming the story, about walking into a room full of people who once dismissed her and letting them see exactly what they missed. She was no longer the +1. She was the headline. And make no mistake, she didn't plan to arrive quietly. And what happened next? You'll want to stay for that because, trust me, everything they thought they knew about her, it was about to come undone. She didn't say yes to the wedding out of revenge. Not at first. There was no secret plan to sabotage the ceremony, no dramatic speeches locked and loaded. Stella wasn't that person anymore. She'd buried the petty version of herself years ago, right next to the broken girl who used to cry herself to sleep over a man who treated her like a seasonal accessory. But when that invitation landed in her hands, heavy with perfume and entitlement, something stirred. Not rage, not bitterness, something quieter, sharper. A whisper in the back of her mind, one that said, "Go show them." Not because you need to prove anything to them, but because you need to prove something to yourself. Because here's the truth. They never tell you. Sometimes closure doesn't come from long talks or final goodbyes. Sometimes closure shows up in heels and silk, and the kind of confidence that doesn't flinch when the past tries to make eye contact. So she said yes not to him, not to them, to her, the woman she'd become. The one who had clawed her way back from humiliation with grace and grit. The one who no longer asked, "Was I enough?" But instead knew she always had been. They just didn't see it. She spent days curating her look, not for vanity, for armor. A custom gown in midnight blue, sleek, striking, unapologetic. A slit high enough to speak without saying a word. Her hair pulled back like a crown, not a curtain. Jewelry, subtle but sharp, nothing borrowed, nothing blue, everything hers. She remembered standing in front of the mirror the night before her flight, not to admire herself, but to meet herself. Because for the first time in years, she didn't see the girl Marco left behind. She saw the woman he could never deserve. Still, she didn't expect the chaos she caused by simply showing up. The next few days were a blur of logistics, custom gown fittings, flights, strategically leaked press mentions that hinted at her recent business success without screaming it. She didn't want to show off. She wanted to show up as the woman she'd fought to become. Her old friend, the one she left the note for all those years ago, called her the night before the flight. "Are you sure about this?" she asked gently. "You owe them nothing." "I know. That's the point. Because showing up isn't always about proving them wrong. Sometimes showing up is about reminding yourself how far you've come. The morning of the wedding dawned warm and golden, like the universe had sent sunlight as a peace offering. The coastal estate buzzed with the energy of $1 million production, because that's exactly what it was. Caterers glided like clockwork. Musicians rehearsed the fifth rewrite of a casual love song. Stylists, planners, PR handlers, everyone moved with forced calm, masking panic behind clipboards and espresso shots. The press had arrived hours earlier, tipping off the illusion of exclusivity. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a media event. Drones circled like lazy vultures. Cameras lined the estate entrance, and photographers polished their lenses like they were about to shoot royalty. And in a way they were. Marco Monroe, tech golden boy turned billionaire investor, was marrying Celine Devonshire, model, philanthropist, and heiress of the Devonshire design empire. It was the kind of union tabloids worshipped. Beauty, wealth, legacy, the headlines wrote themselves. But the story everyone came to tell, that wasn't the one that would unfold. Because just after noon, while guests were still sipping champagne and murmuring in curated designer fabrics, the buzz changed. A single black car pulled up. No entourage, no press alert, just a sleek, silent vehicle that whispered power without screaming it. Doors opened, and out stepped Stella. And for a moment, everything stopped. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath because she didn't look like a woman showing up to watch her ex get married. She looked like a woman who had already won. Midnight blue gown that kissed the earth and carved her shape like a sculpture. Hair pulled into a low twist that said chic without begging for approval. Skin glowing not with makeup but with freedom. That rare kind of radiance you only get when you don't need anyone's permission to shine. The press turned immediately. Cameras fired like fireworks. Who is that? She wasn't on the list. Wait, is that Stella? Stella. And Marco, standing at the top of the garden steps beside the altar, caught it all. He turned, looked, froze. For a full 10 seconds he forgot to breathe, because the girl he left behind, the one he dismissed, diminished, and discarded like a seasonal coat, had just walked into his wedding, looking like his consequence. But Stella didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. She smiled once politely and made her way down the marble pathway like it was hers. And in many ways, it was because her presence stole the air from the ceremony. Her silence became the new music. Her story, one no one in that space fully knew, had suddenly become the loudest thing in the room. She took her seat near the front, legs crossed, chin high, not defiant, not arrogant, just whole. Celine saw her too, and to her credit, she didn't react. Not visibly. But her eyes flicked, her posture shifted, and anyone watching closely could tell. She felt it. The bride knew the ex wasn't just a footnote. She was the shadow that never truly left the story. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for the most cinematic beat, the music swelled. The ceremony began. A hush fell. Marco straightened his tie. Selene stepped forward in lace and diamonds, but the cameras, they kept drifting toward Stella. Toward the woman whose name had once been deleted from Marco's life, but whose presence was now rewriting the ending of his perfect day. And if you're watching this right now thinking, what would I have done? Here's a better question. What would they say if you walked in like Stella did? Because Stella wasn't finished. She hadn't said a word. But the day was about to speak for her. And Marco, he watched it all unfold, tried to play it cool, laughed too loud at his best man speech, avoided eye contact with her during dinner. But his fiancée, Celine, she noticed, women always do. Because Celine wasn't dumb. Vain, maybe, but stupid not at all. She leaned in once during the evening and whispered something sharp into Marco's ear. He flinched. She didn't laugh. And Stella, she saw it all from across the room. The very empire Marco thought he'd built without her was cracking, and she didn't have to lift a single finger. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't what you do, it's what your absence did to them, and that's what made it so delicious. Because as they toasted champagne flutes and exchanged curated vows beneath chandeliers and floral arches, Stella didn't have to say a word to rewrite the entire narrative. She was the story now. Not as the jilted ex, not as the girl left behind, but as the one who disappeared, transformed, and came back untouchable. But let's rewind for a moment. Because before the arrival, before the stares and whispers, before Marco's jaw nearly hit his cufflinks, there was the disappearance. Stella had vanished into a world no one expected her to survive in, let alone thrive. When she left, she didn't just move apartments, she changed countries. She moved to Lisbon with nothing but 2 suitcases and a mind full of bruises. No plan, no comfort, no applause, just a vow to herself. Never again will I shrink to fit someone's world. And that became her blueprint. She enrolled in a coding boot camp, not because she wanted to be trendy, but because she was done asking men to build things for her. She wanted to understand how the world worked behind the curtain. She learned fast, studied like her breath depended on it, lived off black coffee and secondhand ambition. By the end of year 1, she launched her first digital product. It failed badly. Most people would have stopped there, but Stella wasn't most people anymore. She buried the shame, picked through the rubble, and started again. Quietly, fiercely. No startup parties, no LinkedIn posts, just work. Relentless, unsexy, no days off kind of work. She learned how to pitch, how to fundraise, how to own rooms filled with men who didn't expect her to know what seed round meant. She faced rejections that made her cry in bathroom stalls and wins that no one clapped for but her reflection. And by year 4, she was the youngest tech founder in Europe to secure a $10 million Series A funding round. Let that sink in. The girl who once cried herself to sleep over a man who made her feel small now stood on Forbes' radar, had a wait list of investors begging to get into her next round, and a team of 80 employees who looked to her for vision. And still she told no one from her past. No flashy posts, no revenge selfies, no calls to just catch up. She didn't need to broadcast her comeback. She was living it. But the beauty of the universe, it always circles back. And the people who once underestimated you, they always hear about it eventually. The whispers had started about a year before the wedding. A mysterious founder shaking up the sustainability tech space. Female, young, fierce, unattached to any VC bros or nepotism. A real outsider with teeth. Marco's board members mentioned her once during a meeting. He didn't connect the dots. Not yet. But Celine did because, unlike him, she watched Stella quietly, studied her. And if you're wondering, yes, there was jealousy, but also something deeper. Respect. Because deep down, every woman knows what it costs to rebuild yourself from ashes no one mourned. And Celine, she might have won the man, but she knew Stella had won something bigger. Stella didn't need validation. She didn't even need recognition. But showing up to that wedding, that was about alignment. A full circle moment. Not for applause, not for revenge, but for her. And if you've ever felt like you were the forgotten one, the underestimated one, the maybe someday, drop a heart in the comments because Stella's story isn't just a fairy tale. It's a blueprint. And we're just getting to the best part. Marco's mother gasped when she saw her. A soft, involuntary sound that escaped before she could remember. She wasn't supposed to feel anything about Stella anymore. It wasn't the kind of gasp reserved for gossip. It was the kind of gasp that said, "I made a mistake. We all did." Celine blinked once, then again. Her eyes narrowed the way people's do when they're trying to register a threat they didn't see coming, because she had prepared herself for a lot of things that day. Puffy eyes, frizzy hair, overcooked duck, even cold feet. But this, she hadn't prepared for Stella. Not this Stella. Not the Stella who moved through the ceremony like she owned the copyright to every scene. Not the Stella whose presence was so silent and self-assured even the violinist missed a note trying not to stare. Not the Stella wrapped in that gown, deep navy, lined with a constellation of stitched silver, tailored like power itself. Marco's best man, Julian, leaned over and whispered, "That's the one that got away, huh?" Marco didn't answer because there was no answer. How do you explain to someone that you left a woman like that? How do you tell them you once called her too ordinary, too ambitious, too not enough, and then watched her walk into your wedding looking like she was crafted by divine retaliation? A few rows back, the whispers spread like spilled perfume. Some didn't recognize her. Some did. The ones who had met her years ago couldn't reconcile the memory with the masterpiece now commanding the front row. They tried to pretend they weren't impressed. But the way they stared gave them away. Even the photographers supposed to focus on the bride kept angling toward Stella. And she never flinched. She knew what they were thinking. She could feel it. That magnetic, almost disorienting power of someone who no longer needs to speak to be heard. The kind of presence you only earn after years of being silenced, doubted, and dismissed. Stella didn't just glow. She radiated confidence, clarity, closure. She crossed her legs slowly, placed her hand over the clutch resting in her lap, and glanced up at the altar, not to make a scene, but because the story unfolding was hers, whether they liked it or not. Marco met her eyes. A flicker, just a flicker of something, passed through him. Regret, panic, maybe even longing. He looked away too quickly for anyone to know. But Stella caught it, and she smiled. Not a smirk, not petty, just the kind of smile that says, "I've healed so far past you, you don't even recognize the view from where I stand." It was the kind of smile that cracks a man open from the inside, because it reminds him of every door he closed that never unlocked again. And Selena, she noticed the glance. She noticed everything. She adjusted her veil, stiffened her back, and whispered something to Marco as she took her place beside him. He nodded, distracted. But in that moment, just for a second, his hands trembled because for all his money and charm and press-friendly smiles, there was one thing Marco Monroe couldn't buy back. Stella and the version of himself that left her behind. That man no longer felt like the hero in his own story. If you're watching this, and you've ever wondered whether people regret losing you, let me tell you something. They do. Maybe not immediately, but eventually, when you level up without them, when you glow differently, when you show up without warning, and make the world notice you. So, if you've ever felt invisible before, drop a star in the comments because this next part, this is where Stella's silence becomes a storm. And no one, not the groom, not the bride, not even the guests, was ready for what was about to unfold. If you're shocked already, just wait. The ending isn't just a twist, it's a revelation. Stick around. And if you love justice served cold, subscribe. Marco turned toward her as the officiant droned on, the way someone glances at a sudden chill in the air. His lips curled into that signature smile, charming, controlled, rehearsed. The same smile he used in interviews, in investor meetings, in red carpet photos with Celine. It was the smile of a man used to getting what he wanted, of managing perception, like a spreadsheet. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. as if the words were meant to float past the ceremony to land just for her. But something in his eyes cracked. It was subtle. You'd miss it if you didn't know what to look for, but Stella saw it instantly. His pupils didn't dilate in surprise. They shrank. That's fear. Mild panic dressed as curiosity. And his jaw tightened, but only slightly. His fingers rubbed the edge of his cufflink the way he always did when his mind spiraled. Marco was unraveling internally while the world smiled at him, like this was the best day of his life. But it wasn't because standing 20 feet away was his greatest regret, wearing confidence like a crown. Stella didn't respond to his words. Not with her mouth, anyway. She tilted her head just slightly and held his gaze. "I see you," her eyes said. "And I see what you lost." And that was the moment. That exact second when the groom realized you only know you've made a mistake when it walks in taller than you remembered. When it radiates peace without needing your presence. When it doesn't come to ask for closure, but offers it anyway, just by standing still. Marco looked away first. And that's how you know, because a man who walks away from gold thinking it's gravel always flinches when he realizes he was wrong. The officiant asked for the rings. Marco blanked. His best man nudged him gently, pulling him back into the moment. But Marco's mind wasn't in the wedding anymore. It had jumped backwards violently to that day he told Stella she didn't fit this world, that her ambition made him feel crowded, that her love, though deep, was too heavy to carry. And now here she was, weightless, untouchable, standing tall in a world she built. He swallowed hard. Celine noticed her smile faltered for a beat. Stella, she never moved. Because when you're the one who was left behind, discarded, underestimated, you don't need revenge. Sometimes your presence is the loudest revenge of all. Because power like that, it doesn't come from shouting. It comes from surviving, from growing, from becoming the thing they swore you could never be. And just when Marco thought the ceremony could go on as planned, the universe had other plans because something or someone was about to interrupt, and the real story had only just begun. The ceremony ended the way a movie does, when you know the director left an alternate ending on the cutting room floor. The kiss, the applause, the forced claps from people who weren't clapping for love, but for closure, or at least for the open bar. Stella remained seated the whole time. Not out of protest, not from pain, but because her standing wasn't required. Her power came from stillness. But dinner was a different game. The reception was hosted in a glass-roofed garden courtyard, bathed in fairy lights and self-importance. Strings of jasmine dangled from trellises like whispers, and the clinking of wine glasses was timed with curated laughter. This was where reputations were managed. This was where the real performance began. And that's when the might came out. First the best man, then Selena's sister, too emotional to finish her speech, though everyone could tell she was reading off a notes app. A few chuckles, a few tears. And then, as if fate had been waiting to flick the final domino, Selene reached for the mic. She stood gracefully, her gown shimmering with the kind of beauty that gets you on magazine covers, but not necessarily into real love. Her voice sweetened with champagne and strategy. Rang clear. "We just want to thank everyone for being here today," she said, eyes sweeping the crowd. "It means so much to celebrate with friends, family, and those who've played important roles in Marco's journey." Then she looked directly at Stella. "We're especially honored to have his ex here," she said with a perfect smile. "It takes courage to show up." There it was, a sugar-coated dagger dipped in etiquette, dressed in politeness, but sharp enough to bleed ego. The room went still. A few heads turned like they weren't eavesdropping. One, of course, they were. Stella tilted her head again and stood. Not rushed, not rattled. She walked up to the microphone with a grace that felt rehearsed, but wasn't. It was earned. Every step was quiet thunder, and by the time she reached the center, even the servers had stopped moving. She held the mic gently, looked around, let the silence marinate, let them wonder what she would say. "I wasn't planning to speak," she began, her voice calm, but soaked in steel. "But since I've been honored," the crowd chuckled nervously. Celine's smile froze in place. "I'll say a few words." Marco shifted in his chair. "Marco and I, we were very different people 5 years ago," Stella said, her eyes steady. "And I think we both thought we knew what love looked like. But the truth is, sometimes love doesn't end. It just evolves into lessons, into boundaries, into the kind of silence that teaches you more than words ever could." Someone in the back audibly whispered, "Damn." Stella smiled. She wasn't done. "When Marco ended things, I thought I'd lost everything. My future, my worth, my voice. But turns out what I lost was just the echo of who I thought I needed to be." She paused. "And what I gained was me." She didn't look at Marco. She didn't need to. She was speaking to every woman in that room who had been dismissed, belittled, or left behind with no explanation, only echoes and empty inboxes. "To the bride," Stella continued, raising her glass, "I hope your love is kind. And to everyone else, sometimes the best revenge isn't payback." She took one step back. "It's becoming untouchable." The room exploded. Cheers, murmurs, stunned silence wrapped in applause. Celine lowered her glass. "Marco." He didn't blink for a full 5 seconds. "Let me ask you, if you had one chance to say your truth in front of everyone who doubted you, what would you say? What line would you drop that would echo in their minds long after you left? Drop it in the comments below. Your one-liner, your mic drop. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up. But showing up with dignity, that's when you own the room. And Stella, she didn't just own it. She rewrote the narrative. Stella stood there in heels that cost more than Marco's first car, her voice echoing softly beneath the glass ceiling. But it wasn't just her voice people heard. It was the sound of arrival, of power reclaimed, of years swallowed in silence now flooding back in precision-cut syllables. "Once," she said, glancing around the room like she wasn't just speaking to them, but through them. "Someone here believed I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong, that I had no name." She let the sentence hang just long enough for Marco to flinch. The room was so quiet you could hear the shift in posture, chairs creaking as guests leaned in, breathing slower, waiting. "But names," Stella continued, her voice, velvet-coated steel, "are not inherited. They're built." And today, she paused. Every eye in the room fixed on her. "It's the name behind the tech company that funded this very wedding venue." Gasps, muffled and sharp, ricocheted around the garden like glass breaking on marble. Even Celine's confident posture faltered. She turned toward Marco slowly, like she was watching a ghost drift through her honeymoon. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "Marco." His fingers twitched on his wine glass. He knew the name. Of course he did. Stellara. It had been in every tech magazine for the last 6 months, profiled as the breakout AI platform revolutionizing female-founded startups. The name Stella created by blending her own with Aurora, the light that shows up after darkness. And now it was literally lighting up the most expensive wedding he'd ever hosted. He didn't know. He never knew, because when he left her, she had nothing but a cracked iPhone, a thrift store laptop, and a small amount in her account. He thought she'd crawl, disappear, settle. But she didn't crawl. She built a ladder one rung at a time with every sleepless night, every client who ghosted her, every investor who called her too emotional, every rejection that carved out more resilience, and now her name was stitched into the contract for this very garden venue right next to the catering company, the lighting rig, and the 3-tier cake flown in from Milan. Stella looked at Marco again, calm, measured, devastating. She said, "It's funny." She scanned the stunned faces. When you're told you don't belong somewhere, you start creating spaces where you do. People didn't know whether to clap, cry, or simply watch. They did all three because what they were witnessing wasn't just a speech. It was a resurrection. The return of someone they thought had vanished. But Stella hadn't vanished. She'd been building quietly, fiercely, out of sight, and above expectations. She leaned in slightly, like she was sharing a secret with every woman who had ever been made to feel small. "And for the record," she added, soft but firm, "sometimes being underestimated is the most powerful thing that can happen to you, because by the time they see you coming," she stepped back from the mic, "you're already in the room they built without you." Silence. Then applause. The eruption. The room broke into thunderclaps. Not out of politeness, but reverence. Because everyone, every single person knew they just witnessed something rare. Not revenge, not drama. Evolution. And if you're still here watching, maybe you've been underestimated too. Maybe someone once told you your name didn't carry weight, that your dreams were too loud, that your seat at the table didn't exist. But trust me, you can build the table. You can name the room. You can own the skyline. Drop a rose in the comments if you felt every word of Stella's speech. Because this story, it's not fiction. It's a mirror. And the best part, the most unbelievable twist was still to come. Marco's jaw twitched so sharply, you'd think someone had rewound his face back to disbelief in slow motion. For a man so polished, so perfectly media-trained, this was the first time in years his expression cracked like porcelain. And Celine, her fork, silver engraved, flown in from Paris, clattered against her gold-rimmed plate like a truth too heavy to hold. She didn't even blink, just stared at Stella, mouth parted, eyes calculating a future that suddenly didn't look so shiny anymore. And the room? Oh, the room had stopped breathing entirely. Stella didn't gloat. She didn't smirk or flex or toss her hair like some bad soap opera villain. No, she just stood there, poised, elegant, impossibly calm. The kind of calm you only get when you've already won. She looked straight at Celine, then at Marco, and then just loud enough for every camera and ear in that golden garden to hear. She said, "I figured since I paid for it, I'd show up." There it was, the audible gasp. Not polite surprise, not light laughter, a genuine full-body collective reaction. The sound people make when their internal scripts suddenly get rewritten. Marco's fingers slipped off his wine glass. Celine turned pale in a way no blush could hide. Because here's what nobody knew. Not the guests, not the wedding planner, not even the couple themselves. The venue, the vineyard, the chandeliers, the musicians playing soft jazz in the corner. All of it had been quietly funded by a shell company. And that shell company was a portfolio asset of Stellara. Stella had been in the paperwork. She was the reason the wedding had looked like a scene from a royal Netflix series. And no one, not a single soul, had connected the dots until now. Until she pulled off the cleanest, classiest, most cinematic power move in modern memory. The bride's voice finally returned, weak and trailing, like the words were struggling through molasses. You paid for this." Stella turned to her. Her voice didn't rise, didn't falter. She wasn't angry. She was clear. "I paid for the land this venue sits on. The design team, the tech setup, the catering firm. I've acquired 5 of the vendors used here through my portfolio network. So yes, I paid for this wedding indirectly, but intentionally." And then she said the line that would later be quoted on 1,000 TikToks and stitched into every revenge story aesthetic reel for the next 6 months. "You'd be amazed what you can afford when you stop chasing people who don't see your worth." Boom. People weren't just clapping now. They were watching history. Some guests turned to each other, eyebrows raised, whispering Stella's name like it had become a verb. Others, particularly the women, looked like they were watching a version of themselves walk across coals and emerge, not just unburned, but on fire. Because this wasn't just Stella's moment. It was the moment. The moment when every girl who's ever been left on, ghosted after building someone's dreams, passed over for the shinier, glossier version of herself, stood up inside their skin and whispered, "We rise." So here's the real question for you watching this right now. If you could walk into the very place where you were once broken and stand taller, louder, stronger, would you? Drop a diamond emoji if you've ever dreamed of coming back. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove you right? Because that's what Stella just did. And believe it or not, this wasn't even the biggest shock of the night. Stella stood there, not basking in attention, but grounded in it. She wasn't flaunting wealth or power. She was radiating something far more rare. Freedom. The kind of freedom that only comes when you no longer need validation from the very people who once withheld it, when you no longer flinch at being underestimated because you've grown beyond the version of you they thought they knew. But then the final card flipped. A soft murmur spread across the room. One of the guests had Googled something. Probably the older cousin who kept his phone in a leather case and thought he was being discreet. He'd connected the dots. And suddenly, murmurs became whispers. Whispers became gasps, because Stella's company Stellara not only funded the venue, it had recently acquired the luxury hotel chain that Marco's family had spent decades building. Yes, that chain, the one with a velvet-wrapped legacy passed from hand to hand, like a fragile crown. The one he had once bragged to Stella about during Sunday brunch, calling it the family jewel. The one he was supposed to inherit, but couldn't quite manage to keep afloat after a series of bad press scandals and digital missteps. Guess who'd swept in with a silent offer through a firm with no recognizable face, through a paper trail buried under 7 holding companies? Stella. She didn't just walk away with her dignity. She walked away, studied her opponents, learned the game they played, and came back owning the board. Celine's complexion turned the color of an unfinished thought. She tried to whisper something to Marco, but even her voice seemed to betray her. And Marco? He blinked like someone waking up from a dream where he was the hero, only to realize too late he was the plot device in someone else's origin story. And that's when Stella turned not to them, but to the crowd. Her voice didn't tremble. Her tone didn't rise. She wasn't angry. She was clear. "I didn't come here to ruin a wedding. I came because for years I thought I needed to explain myself, to defend my choices, to prove I was worthy of love, success, of being seen." She paused. "Let that hang. But you don't owe explanations to people who only clapped for you when you were quiet." Silence. Then heads nodding. Women in the back squeezing each other's hands under the tables. Someone whispered, "Say that again." Stella took a breath. "I'm not here to reclaim a man. I'm here to reclaim myself. And the version of me that was buried under your expectations, she doesn't exist anymore." Let's stop right here for a second. You. Yes, you. Watching this. Think of someone who once looked at you and only saw what they wanted to see. Who dismissed your dreams, who told you they were being realistic, when all they were being was afraid. What if you could walk back into their world not to hurt, not to punish, but simply to show them you survived. No, you thrived. Drop a strong emoji if you've ever wanted to come back and stand in your truth. Not for applause, but for closure. Because that's what Stella just did. And in doing so, she didn't just shock them. She freed them. And you know what's wild? That room full of people who once whispered about how she wasn't his type, or she'd never make it, or she was just a phase, they didn't just regret what they said. They regretted who they were when they said it, because now they saw her. Really saw her, and every single one of them knew they had judged too soon. But by the time they realized it, she was already gone. They were standing under the same cherry blossom tree where he once got down on one knee with a diamond and a promise, both of which eventually meant nothing. But this time, there were no photographers, no champagne flutes, no curated fairy tale, just the soft rustle of wind through petals and the uncomfortable silence of a man finally seeing the truth through eyes no longer clouded by ego. Marco stood there, no longer the confident CEO who once had the world and Stella in the palm of his hand. His shoulders, once proud and square, had sunk slightly. His jawline, once set in ambition, now trembled with questions he didn't know how to ask. But the biggest shift wasn't in his posture. It was in his eyes. They weren't focused on him anymore. They were fixed on her. You built an empire, he murmured, voice brittle with disbelief. Without me. Stella tilted her head, not in arrogance, but in gentle truth. No, Marco, I built it because of you, or maybe despite you. I'm still figuring that out. He exhaled a small, almost broken sound. You never reached out. She raised an eyebrow. When exactly? When you released a breakup press statement like I was a brand acquisition gone wrong? Or maybe when you got engaged to a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine and into your mother's approval rating? He looked down. No defense, no spin. Because there was none. You know what hurts? Stella continued, her voice soft but unwavering. It's not that you left. It's that you never saw me. I was in front of you for years, loving you, dreaming beside you, and you looked through me like I was a placeholder until your real life started. He stepped closer, hands open, unsure of what to do with them. But you're everything now. She laughed quietly. No, Marco. I was everything then. You just didn't recognize it. And that was the final truth. The kind that doesn't explode, it sinks in. Like gravity. Like silence after a slammed door. Like the moment you realize you had gold in your hands and dropped it because it wasn't shiny enough at the time. I made mistakes, he said, voice cracking. I let fear guide me. Expectations, my parents, my image. But Stella, I never stopped thinking about you. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment he thought, maybe. Maybe there was a crack in the armor, a pause, a chance. But Stella had changed, and this version of her didn't live in maybe anymore. I stopped thinking about you years ago, she said kindly. Not out of anger, out of survival. And you know what? That was the best thing that ever happened to me. The wind picked up again, tossing loose petals around their feet like confetti that had missed its cue. Marco stood there watching her walk away, not with drama or vengeance, but with grace. Like someone who had already forgiven him. Not for his sake, but for hers. She didn't look back. Because the past was no longer her home. And that, dear friends, is what real power looks like. Not revenge, not applause, but the quiet, undeniable peace of a woman who reclaimed her narrative and doesn't need anyone's permission to keep writing it. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been dismissed, overlooked, replaced? And have you ever dreamed not of revenge, but of healing so completely they wouldn't even recognize who you became? If that hits home, drop something in the comments. Anything. Because Stella's story isn't just fiction. It's the blueprint. And the best part, She was just getting started, and when she said it, when Stella let that truth leave her lips, it didn't echo like a declaration of victory. It landed more like a quiet exhale, the kind of breath you take when you finally set down the weight you've been carrying for years. The kind that lets your shoulders drop, your spine straighten, and your heart beat without armor for the first time in forever. She wasn't angry anymore. That's the part that surprised even her, because for a long time she imagined this moment would be about proving something, showing up in front of everyone who had doubted her, making them feel what she had felt. But standing there bathed in golden afternoon light under those same cherry blossoms from her past, she felt something so much deeper than revenge. She felt peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from being told you're enough, but the kind that comes from no longer needing to be told. Because Stella was no longer that woman begging to be chosen. She was the woman who had chosen herself. The one who didn't just survive the fall, but studied the wind, built her wings, and learned to fly because of it. She left the wedding not in triumph, not in smugness, but in stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't apologize for walking away from a fire you once thought was warmth. Her heels clicked against the marble path as guests parted silently like the Red Sea. Each of them now unable to look away, but also unsure how to meet her eyes. And Marco, he never said another word. He didn't need to, because every second she walked away was its own kind of answer. The girl he once dismissed as not enough had become the woman whose shadow now stretched longer than his entire legacy. But Stella wasn't walking toward a spotlight. She was walking home to herself. Later that night, when the last candle at the wedding had been extinguished and the champagne had lost its fizz, Stella sat barefoot in her new apartment overlooking the city skyline. No cameras, no audience, just her and the stars, and a quiet glass of wine that she had poured for no one but herself. She scrolled through a few messages. Some from guests she barely remembered, congratulating her, applauding her speech. Some from strangers who'd caught wind of her quiet empire, and were now quoting her words like gospel. You'd be amazed what you can afford when you stop chasing people who don't see your worth. But the message that stayed with her wasn't in her inbox. It was in the mirror. Because for the first time in years, Stella could look herself in the eye and feel nothing but pride. Not because she had money or power or status now, but because she had clarity. She finally understood she was never too much. She just loved the wrong person with the right heart, the right. She gave before she had learned to hold space for herself. She believed in someone who hadn't yet earned her belief. And that's not weakness. That's growth. You see, sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't wealth or status or success. It's peace. It's walking into a room full of people who once doubted you and not needing a single one of them anymore. It's smiling when they ask how you're doing because you really are okay. It's no longer wanting to go back. Not even for a second. Now tell me, have you ever outgrown a version of yourself that once begged for less? Have you ever come full circle and realized the door that once closed on you was actually a blessing? Because Stella's story isn't just a story. It's a reminder that becoming her doesn't happen overnight. It happens when you stop looking for someone else to hand you your worth, and finally remember you were whole all along. Because the truth is, most of us won't walk into a wedding we paid for, dressed in designer silence and poetic justice. We won't own the building where someone once tried to bury us. We might not get the cinematic moment where every head turns and every whisper hushes as we walk in. But we will have our moment. It might come when you get that job you thought you'd never qualify for. When you finally open the door to your own apartment after crashing on couches and pretending you were fine. When you sit across from someone who once said you weren't ready and you no longer feel the need to prove them wrong because you already proved yourself right. That's your Stella moment. And you know what makes it powerful? It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not about revenge served cold with a side of poetic irony. It's quiet, intentional, freeing. It's the peace that settles in your chest when you realize you've become the person you once hoped someone else would validate. It's when you no longer chase apologies. When you stop waiting for someone to recognize your worth. When you start looking in the mirror and saying, I see you, I'm proud of you, I've got you. That's what Stella found. That's what so many of us are still fighting for. And if you're in the thick of it, if you're still building from brokenness, still healing from the heartbreak, still rising from the rubble of someone's careless goodbye, I want you to hear this. You don't need to rush the becoming. You don't have to perform strength. You don't need to broadcast your glow up. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep going in silence and let your growth be the loudest thing in the room when it's time. Because one day, you'll walk into the version of your life you once begged for. And it won't feel like a comeback. It'll feel like coming home. And when that day comes, you won't need closure. You are the closure. Now let me ask you something sincerely. What's the moment you're working toward? What's the version of you you're building quietly, patiently, painfully? Drop in the comments and tell us your Stella moment, whether it already happened or is still loading, because your story matters, and someone out there is waiting for the day you tell it, just like this. And maybe, just maybe, your comeback isn't for them to see, it's for you to feel. And when you do, it'll be enough. More than enough, because so are you. Because at the end of the day, that's what this channel is about. Not just drama, not just shocking twists or poetic justice, but transformation. The quiet kind, the painful kind, the kind that doesn't always come with applause, but changes everything anyway. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your worth, your strength, your power to rise even when no one's watching, then you're exactly where you need to be. Here, we don't just tell stories. We honor survival. We celebrate the unseen battles. We spotlight the messy, beautiful, soul-cracking moments that turn ordinary people into legends of their own lives. So if you're ready for more resilience, more redemption, more stories that hold a mirror to who you could be, then don't just scroll past. Hit subscribe because we're just getting started. And when the world forgets the surface, the job title, the heartbreak, the rejection, what they'll always remember is how you rose. Because here at Evergreen Soul Stories, we don't tell stories to entertain. We tell them to awaken. To the one watching in silence, healing in secret, and building in the shadows, we see you. And when your moment comes, make it unforgettable. With that, see you in the next one. In